All right, everybody, I want to welcome you back to another episode here with Top Comics Pressing. And in this video, what I want to do is go over part 2 of a check-in of a relatively large order I got and just try to examine some of the defects I see in a book before I work on it and hopefully illustrate some of what can and cannot be approved with a press and a clean. And so here we have what I would consider a very nice copy of Amazing Spider-Man 28, which I believe is the first appearance of the Molten Man. And so a key, very early Amazing Spider-Man. I would say Amazing Spider-Man is probably the most highly sought after series or full run of comic books outside the Golden Age. So, if you're going to Silver Age or later, everybody wants Spider-Man, everybody loves Spider-Man, and every single issue of these early Amazing Spider-Mans is just a treat to own or hold or touch or to improve. And so this copy, on first glance, I would say looks really nice. But there are some defects here that I think are ultimately going to limit the grade. So the first of which is you can see what I'm assuming were water droplets at some point that it kind of splattered on. So there's a sequence of them here. So that's surface damage. There's a little bit of a loss of gloss or reflectivity in here. If you kind of look, you can just see that something at some point was kind of splattered on it. And what's more significant is you'll notice that there's a crease here kind of through the top of Spider-Man, but there's a second slightly longer one there. And if we follow right along here especially, there's a horizontal crease that almost blends in with the webbing, but it is actually a crease. If I hold it there in the glare, you can see very clearly it's a crease. There's also some minor wear and damage down to this bottom corner. And so all in all, it's still a really nice copy. There are no major pieces missing. There are no major creases that bisect huge parts of the cover. So there's no issue crease. There's no massive corner crease. But there is a good amount of creasing, if you look at the edges. The spine actually looks really good overall. If we take a peek at the staples, you'll notice this one here, it looks really sharp. It's got a little bit of shine left to it. This one also looks really sharp. If we flip it over here and look at the back cover, you can notice that there's a very little bit of a tear there. It's not a bad one. That's very small. It's smaller than a fingernail for sure. This dirt here hopefully will clean up. The dirt over here will clean up, but you'll notice this top corner does have a good amount of damage. And while some of this will press out, that is far too much damage to come completely out, even with the iron and press. And so there's still going to be some residual wear there. But the rest of it looks really sharp, All in all, this comic I think is free of stains. And most importantly, if you open it up and look, it is a very healthy, very happy cream color. The interior pages look absolutely beautiful and stunning. This is early enough to be the Steve Ditko era of the Amazing Spider-Man, so very good interior colors. You can tell at some point somebody was asking $250 for this in pencils, so hopefully we'll clean that up. It's not uncommon to find pencil marks either on the back of a book or on the splash page. But I would say all in all, tremendous copy. I personally think that this will grade somewhere in the 6.5 range as a function both of that surface damage, but also a lot of the smaller, finer creasing that we're seeing on all of the edges. And so while it is a very nice copy, I don't think it's ever going to make that truly, truly high grade. But for a Silver Age copy, Ditko era Amazing Spider-Man, this is a great copy to have in a collection. So it's one absolutely I would recommend sending to CGC. One thing I do want to comment on, you'll notice that there is a store stamp right across here. People have different feelings on store stamps. I think for Silver Age books, particularly if they're placed in a really nice spot, they can actually be kind of fun for a date stamp or a store stamp. This one, unfortunately, is a dark stamp across a dark area of the book, and so you don't get to see it all. So, maybe it's not the best example. But in general, I bought my first appearance of the Green Goblin because it had a very clear April 1963 stamp right underneath the Amazing Spider-Man, and it was very clear, and it was nice and parallel, and it squared up, and I really liked it. So I got that copy particularly for the store stamp, which I thought was good, mostly because I'm an April birthday. But all in all, a very nice copy here. I think that one goes in the clean and press and slab category. Coming on up in the Amazing Spider-Man series, we have ASM number 210, first appearance of Madam Web. So going from Ditko to Romita, and now all the way to JRJR, so John Romita Jr., you can see that this is several eras of Amazing Spider-Man later, all the way in 1980. Again, first glance, very nice copy, no major creases. There is some spine wear right in here, you can see right above my finger. So that's something that'll hopefully press out. And you can see at some point this was exposed to moisture across the back here. Hopefully that'll press out too. But nothing here I would say is alarming. The spine overall is in great shape. You know, you're allowed to have a tick or two. This one's a little bit longer than I might like. So if you look at it, it kind of goes into the yellow, and they judge some of these by length. So my personal guess for this copy is an 8.5, but since it's a key first appearance Spider-Man and it's a big spec book for those of you waiting for the Madam Web whatever movie that she's supposed to be in, you know, I think that this is one I would recommend slabbing and waiting for that movie, and fingers crossed it'll be a good one that'll bring some people into looking for that issue. So that, at least to me, as being a relatively early Amazing Spider-Man, I would slab. The same is going to be true here with this copy. So, you know, Amazing Spider-Man 252 is a very highly sought after, the first ASM comic with the black costume in it, an homage to Amazing Fantasy 15, and this is going to be a really nice copy. It's going to have a number of pressable defects, so you can see that there's a finger bend up here. Now, I will notice that this one will not come all the way out with the press. If you look really carefully, right through here, you can see that there is white damage, so that is slightly color breaking. So we can press it, but it won't ever come out fully. There's some minor edge wear right there, and you know, I'm getting really picky because on these key issues, so is CGC, and so you can see there's a spine tick there, and there's a number of small spine ticks, and so I think this issue is going to come in. If we flip it over, you can see the back is also super sharp. So I think this is going to come in that 992-ish area. It's got a little bit of a corner crease down there, very small corner crease. So, I mean, that is less than a ½ inch across the corner there. That is going to be a true crease that won't press out. So if you look at it and the reflection right there, you can see that it's not just a bend, but that paper and gloss was damaged there. And so that one's going to be a true crease. So I'm thinking this one's going to be an 85909 2, and you might ask why such a broad range, and I think it's going to be how CGC views that, as well as if they catch this small color break up here and whatnot. So, but nevertheless, that issue is so popular in almost any grade that I think that one is going to be a nice high grade copy to slab. Jumping forward a few issues here, we have the Amazing Spider-Man 265. So this is going to be the first appearance of the Silver Sable. This one I think I'm going to say we should probably not slab. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of which is if you compare that Spider-Man logo, you can see that it is considerably tanned relative to the nice newsstand copy before it. And so this copy is going to actually have light tanning, which you can also see here on the interior. And so that means that to get a high grade on this thing, we're going to need to whiten it up. And that's kind of a tedious protocol. And it would be worthwhile if it weren't for some of these other defects. So right in here, you can see that there's quite a bit of spine damage. Now that will flatten out, and so we can make that look better with a press. But if you look at it just straight on, you can see that there's a lot of color breaking there. And while we can flatten it out, we can't make that color breaking kind of inverted Z look better. And there's some more minor damage down here if you look. So there's a little bit of a tear there. This is a crease. There's a little bit of a crease here on the corner. And if we flip it over, I think you can find a little bit more. So particularly here, this is more of a spine tear than a spine tick. It's definitely going through the cover a little bit. And so the combination of those small defects, I think on an issue that's really only sought after in a slab, kind of in that above 9.4, lead me to want to decline working on that one, just to make sure I'm honest with the client about it. Moving forward here to this issue. So this is an early 60s war issue. It is a Joe Kubert cover in art. And so Joe Kubert is a really, just phenomenal, very classic comic book artist. This one is a black cover, which I want to draw your attention to because getting high grade black covers is tedious because those black covers show every defect, they show every crease, they show every finger bend. And this one overall, I think I would send to CGC partially because it looks so bright. I mean, let's just check the age here on this. This is going to be a 1965 book, so kind of middle of the Silver Age, but it looks really bright. It looks really bright on the back. It looks really bright on the front. It looks really bright on the back. You can see that there is very light foxing, so that in principle would be fixable. And could be something that we can consider fixing. You can see it down here as well. I think this level of foxing is really only going to limit it to about an 8.5, given the rest of the book. And I think that you know, is kind of going to ultimately be up to the owner. You will notice that there is some staple rusting on that one. If I recall, it did not transfer to the interior. So if we open this on up, and again, I have my hand cupped under here to make sure I'm supporting it. You know, you can see that there is staple rust down there. It does not look like a lot is transferring to the interior, but it does indeed have staple rust all the way through. But this to me is just like a really, really bright, you know, copy here. And especially with that black cover, I think this thing will hit an 8.85, and for a book of this era to be in this sharp a condition with that white of a cover, with that bright of an interior page, I mean, I think that this is really going to be a nice copy for somebody looking for one of those. So I think that to me is going to be a press. This one, on the other hand, I think I would probably decline. So this is a copy of the Atom. It's the same era DC. This is the Atom number 4. But what you notice here is if I turn this comic gently on its side, is that there is a spine split roughly from here all the way to the bottom. And so that's roughly a 6 to 8 inch spine split. That also means it's detached at that staple, and you can see that there's a staple tear going into that book. And so that means that this book is going to be delicate to work on, but it also means all the little finger bends and the dirt and stuff that one might be able to pick off of here is really not going to be able to help the grade. You can see, especially on the back, it's quite tattered. But that spine split is by far and away the largest grade limiting defect, and that's not something that's pressable or helpable. And so this one, to me, I think I would put in the decline to work on book, only because I don't think I can improve it. All right, moving on up here, Avengers 196, the first full appearance of the Taskmaster. So a villain from the most recent, I think, Black Widow movie, as well as a kind of a classic villain in the Avengers series, as well as a couple of other Marvel crossovers. Definitely a key from 1980. And, you know, the kind of my bar is things pre-1985 are a little bit more worthwhile to get slabbed than things post. You know, it's a really nice staple there. Really nice staple here. We do have a little bit of wear and damage up top here. Some of that does break color, so if you look straight down at that black, you can see that those white lines kind of around that code on the edge next to the comic book code. But other than that, you know, there's a few bends, there's definitely a few wrinkles that need to get pressed out, but no major creases. This area here definitely is pretty much case in point why you need to press books, because you can just see all those bends and defects. That's all coming from the spine, but if you look straight down at it, none of it breaks color. And so I think that is a really great reason to press this book. This one's going to need some ironing though before press to really help out all that intense wrinkling here on the back that you can kind of see right there. So this one, to me, I would say I would press and put some effort into, particularly because it's a key issue that's very recognizable, and it's going to be one of the most popular issues from the 1980s. So here we go, jumping back to the Silver Age. So we have Daredevil number 6. So single-digit Daredevil book, always going to be highly sought after. This one has a name on it. You know, much like the store stamps, these names across the front, if they're kind of post-1970, or sorry, pre-1975, they're not going to have a huge impact on the grade as long as they're not written multiple times all over the book. That was pretty common for things back in the day, and so don't want to take that too seriously. There is some wear right here on the edge. There's some, you know, blunting, and you can kind of see that in the reflection. Some of that will press out. Obviously, the tear and the crease up top here will not press out. There is some surface wear here to the Daredevil logo, so you can see that kind of light purple. I'm not sure what caused that, because it doesn't look like water damage to me, and it doesn't look like a scratch, and it doesn't look like tape pull, so that's a little bit atypical of a defect, but definitely some kind of surface wear. The spine, all in all, does look pretty good. The staples actually look pretty good. They're slightly recessed, so we'll want to pay attention to that when pressing, because that one's already kind of drawn in there. This one's less drawn in, but you can see that it's definitely on the back of the comic, not truly on the side. So if we hold this thing spine down, that staple's definitely on the left half of that. So I definitely want to support that extra when pressing. You know, we do have some stuff in here. I don't know if all of this will dry clean out, but we can give it our best bet and see what we can do with it. If not, maybe we can try some light stain removal on this book. But any single digit Silver Age title is probably going to be worthwhile. And again, you'll notice just how bright and beautiful this interior of this comic book is. This one's almost a shame to slab just because the interior is so gorgeous and the Daredevil kind of pops out of that page at you. But nevertheless, if that's one the owner's after, I'm going to go ahead and send that one off. Moving forward to a giant-sized Master of Kung Fu. So this is one you don't get too often, but I think this is a really nice copy. So there's a little bit of damage you can see right here by my thumb and the glare, but again, if we look at it, it does not appear to be color breaking. You can kind of see it, so hopefully we can press that out. This wear and the damage and the kind of weirdness around these staples, that's common for all these square bounds of this era, and you're never going to be able to press that out just because of where the staple sits on the page, and the same is kind of going to be true of this deep line. So we can make some of that look better by puffing the comic out in the press, but especially around these staples, you're always going to have kind of that weird flow. The good news, though, is CGC so far has not dinged me on any of that. You can see here the staples actually punched through the cover, and, you know, I would consider that a manufacturing thing for the most part. So this one, all in all, is crease-free. It's got a few bends. You know, I think I would press this and just see what CGC says about it. The square bounds of this era are just notoriously hard to find in high grade, and this one looks just really excellent in terms of its, you know, corner sharpness. It doesn't have any major creases. It might have a little bit of a corner crease down there we might be able to fix out. But all in all, just a really phenomenal copy of that book, and so I think I would throw that in the slab copy. G.I. Joe #1, very popular issue for those of you with 80s nostalgia, because you got to get tough, go Joe. The one thing I will caution you about with this book is if you're ever buying one that's raw, you do want to open it up. It has a paper that is a slightly different material than other books of the area. It's slightly more brittle, and it's slightly less supple, and because of that, the center fold tends to detach super easy on this book. And you'll also notice it's a fairly fat issue compared to a normal issue of the era, so we can hold that up against our next copy here, which is an Iron Fist 14, and you can see that G.I. Joe is, you know, roughly twice as fat when you compare the inner pages here, right where I'm kind of squeezing. And so because of that, this issue is a little bit more challenging to press. The staples are super small, and the book is double fat, and the centerfold tends to pop out. And so this is one where I use 3 sheets of 65-pound cardstock in the middle instead of a backer board, and I slide 1 sheet of printer paper under the cover on both covers. Now, this particular issue I think is really great. That centerfold is attached. The corners are all in all pretty sharp. It does have some rounding here, so we're going to want to press that to get that flat. And but you know, the other thing I normally find on these is, for whatever reason, this cover just picks up fingerprints like a sponge, and this one looks pretty fingerprint free. So I think this one is going to be a for sure to slab. Very popular comic, and that one looks like a really sharp, probably 9.6 candidate in my opinion. Moving forward to Iron Fist 14 here, who does not love the first appearance of Sabretooth? What you will notice here is that there is this purple-blue differential gradient. That's actually common on this book. Almost all the raw copies I get have that. I don't know why this one has that gradient from kind of purplish to bluish. I can even that out with our bled procedure, and so I might consider doing that on this book just to help it out. All in all, though, a really great copy. It's never going to be a 9.8 or a 9.6 because it's got this crease up here through the corner. But if we look at the rest of the corners here and some of the other edges, it's really sharp. This corner bend here, it might have a small tear, but I think that crease super small there. And so this copy, you know, I think will be a 9.0 or 9.2 if it does a really good job hiding some of these defects after the press. If they really slam it, or if they graded it right now, I think it would be closer to a 7.5 or an 8.0, particularly with this deep bend. So this thing's going to need to get, you can just see how crushed that is. That thing's going to need to get ironed out before pressed to help it press flat. So, and then some of this is going to need to for sure get cleaned up, at least to the best of our ability. But again, no major creases. No, you know, multiple spine ticks, nothing that, you know, creeps in. There is some spine wear, but nothing that, you know, goes into the book or causes huge parallel creases. And that book, man, people love that book. So that's one where I would slab it with really without too much hesitation. Now this one, I think might be a 9/8. So we want to be extra careful when handling this one. It's got a little bit of some damage up here. We're going to have to press out and hope that we can disguise to CGC. But if we go down the spine, I don't see any spine ticks. The corners look super sharp. This little bit here is a binding tear, so that happened when they cut the book. I'm not worried about that. That generally is a manufacturing defect that does not limit to a 9/8. The same is true up here on this corner. So if you look, all those pages have that same kind of just a little too much paper on the corner. That's all from when it was originally cut, so that should be manufacturing. This thing, I think, has a really good shot at being a 9/8, so I'm going to be extra careful with that one, and any key issue in a 9/8 are kind of the ones that I prefer to slap. Moving way back here to the Silver Age, so this is a Green Lantern from, I believe, the early 60s. Let's just take a peek here in the under the cover. I'm going to snag the corner there. 1963. But when you open up the cover, what I do immediately notice is, again, this burnt marshmallow look, and that's going to be true tanning. And so, at least to me, that's going to make any stain removal or whitening procedure a heck of a lot more difficult. And typically, it's going to show up a lot easier for CGC to flag. And so, heavy tanning, I've learned, is something I try to avoid working on whenever possible. That being said, you know, for an early 1960s book, this is in really good shape. So again, no major creases if we search this whole thing, and those color breaking creases are really what they slam. So I want to make sure we don't have any of that. We've got a little bit of a piece out of spine there, or a little bit of spine chip. So that's for sure going to get marked. And that's probably the biggest defect, honestly, in that. Either this or that moderate staining. But nevertheless, very early Green Lantern book. And so definitely one that I think I would consider slabbing, even if it's not going to make a 9.0 or above grade. This one is going to be a really nice copy, so especially with the Thunderbolts movie coming on up, or Thunderbolts TV show, or Thunderbolts whatever, you know, I think I would slab this copy. We got a little bit of some bending over here. That might be some creasing. We're going to have to press that and hope that it comes out. This one might be just a little too deep to fully press out, but we'll do what we can with it. If we go down the spine looks very sharp overall, so I think that looks great. I would go ahead and take that, and particularly on this back cover, you know, we have one very noticeable spine tick. And so I'm optimistic that I'll be able to hide this defect, particularly sky blue. I have a little bit better luck with than some other colors. So if we can hide the defect right over here, I think this one might be up for a 9.6, which would be a great grade for that issue. This was a particularly low print run era for the Hulk, and so I think being able to get that in there will be nice. Speaking of the Hulk, holy Hulk, let's look at this thing. Now, this one is going to be a little bit lower grade than it looks initially, mostly because this corner crease here, all by itself, this thing would probably limit us to a 7. So if that were the only defect on the book, that's a little bit bigger than just kind of a little itty bitty one, so that's clearly into the book. You're probably looking at a 7.0 just with that one crease. This one also has some clear exposure to something right across here. You can see all those splotches through the red Hulk. And so this one I think is going to come in lower, especially with a little bit of a tear down there. And if we flip it on over, you know, we can see that there's some work to be pressed out here on the corner and some stuff to be dry cleaned. So I think this one's still worth cleaning up. Oh, by the way, let's do the all-important, oh man, these pages are just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful on the inside. But unfortunately, we can see the Marvel value stamp is cut out there. So again, this era of books, 73 through 75, you want to check and see if this poor Marvel value stamp is cut out. This being removed is going to remove about half to 60% of the value of this book just from that Marvel value stamp or MVS being cut out. But this copy or this comic book, particularly because of this epic last panel here where the Wolverine is named, okay, you know, it's not just the Wolverine, but we also see his moniker, the Weapon X. So both the primary name and the secondary name for this character are revealed on this final panel of the book. And because of that single panel, this is a super sought after book. And again, I think I would slab that and grade it. Even though we know it's going to be the MVS, I would probably just declare its value appropriately. And so instead of sending it a standard tier or express tier, I would probably send it economy tier. And I think that would be justified by what will ultimately be kind of a mid-grade, as well as having that MVS cut out. All right, we looked at Amazing Spider-Man 252 before, so this is Marvel Team Up number 141. This is thought to be one of the first covers of the Spider-Man black costume. Very iconic, very popular book. This one, though, I don't think I would slap. I think I'm going to put this one in the pass category. And looking at it, at first glance, you might wonder why I say that. As you'll hear me say multiple times, please flip your comic books over, and if you're going to spend more than a few bucks on a book, feel free to ask somebody to take it out of a bag. So we can see that there's all kinds of spine wear down the back of this book, and particularly if we kind of curl it on its side, we can see that all of these do break color, all the way up there. And because of that, there's going to be a lot of spine ticks. Now, the spine ticks all by itself would probably limit the grade to maybe a 9.4, but I think if we look over here, we're going to be able to see that there is a corner crease as well, and that corner crease is probably going to limit it to maybe an 8.0. It's much smaller than the one on that Hulk, but I think with the corner crease and with those spine ticks, this one's probably never going to make that really high grade. And because this one is a little bit later in 1984, there are a lot of very high grade slabbed copies, and so I think this one is probably best to skip and just maybe enjoy in its raw state. It's still a very nice, very fine, or very fine minus book, maybe fine, very fine at the lowest, but I think unfortunately it's not going to hit that level we want to CGC. And the same, I think, is going to be true for this copy of Moon Knight 57. So this is a nice homage here to Amazing Spider-Man 300. So you can see the nice reference there to After Todd for After Todd McFarlane. First glance, again, very nice copy, but I think for any book kind of this era, especially as you're getting into the 90s, so this is 1993, you're really going to be looking for that 9.6, 9.8 category. And I think if you flip this one over and really kind of go down the spine, you can see that there are several spine ticks that are going to break color, as well as what ultimately is going to be light foxing. So if you look right here in that blue, you can see that it's discolored in a couple of patches, and that's really ultimately going to limit kind of the grade. Now, in principle, that foxing is fixable, but for an issue like this, I don't really think it's going to be worthwhile, just because, there's going to be raw copies that are going to be cheaper otherwise. And you can kind of see it up there on the top edge, a little bit of foxing, especially on the bottom of the first page here. So if you open that up, you can see it's discolored on that. Right by that coupon, right where you're supposed to fill in your name, city, and address. And so that's all light foxing. That by itself, just that light foxing would limit this to a 9.0, even ignoring the spine ticks. And so that book, I think, is best to skip. This one, though, I think is much nicer. So here we don't have the spine ticks. If I slowly scroll the spine on this one, it looks really sharp. There, I believe if I flip this over, I could see one possibly colored breaking tick right there. The corner down here, again, I want to point out, this is a binding tear. So I've seen some people like really lash out at 9/8 that come with that. That thing didn't leave the manufacturing site without that tear. That's not somebody dropping it on its corner or being mean to it. That little tear happened when it cut, and that's called a binding tear. And so don't hold that against the comic book. That's a manufacturing thing. It will only limit the grade above a 9.8. So you can have a 9.8 with a binding tear. You just can't have a book over that with a binding tear. But the cover in this looks way better, I think. I don't see any of that foxing. The spine looks beautiful. And so that one, I think, is going to make a 9.6 for sure, if not a 9.8. And I think that's going to be exactly what we're looking for in a book like that. Peter Parker and the Spectacular Spider-Man #1, featuring the Tarantula. This was a great run of Spider-Man books because they're super easy to read. They're all templated. They're all either 1 issues or 2 issue 1-2 punches, and they all kind of follow the same template, which is just awesome. And so it makes them really easy to read, and it's all about Peter Parker in college. This issue, all in all, I think I might skip. And the reason for that is, while it looks great from the front, when you flip it over again, you're going to see some problems. The first problem you're going to see here is that there is some staining or foxing right up there. And so that level of staining is going to knock you down to probably an 8, if not a 7.5 right there just by itself. And the other thing you're going to see is this right through here is going to be a crease. Now, I could probably polish that line off because that line looks like a lot of dirt, but I bet you if I polish it off, I'm going to get a little bit of a crease under there, and it's going to be hard to hide it from CGC. This is probably a bend, so I'll probably be able to hide that, but the big diagonal right here, I'm probably not going to be able to. You notice that there's a good amount of water damage, so that in principle would be ironable out as long as the paper is not damaged. But ultimately, the defects that we won't be able to take out with a nice press is going to be the crease through here. And while we could remove that stain, we're not going to be able to remove the crease. And so ultimately, I think this issue is going to be one that's best left raw, and hopefully somebody can enjoy the fantastic era of Peter Parker in this Spectacular Spider-Man. Speaking of which, here's one that is the White Tiger, same era book. So this is issue 9 from the same series. This one looks a lot sharper. It's got a little bit of bends up here that need to get pressed out. The spine looks relatively crisp. And if I flip it over, you know, this stuff needs to get cleaned, but that'll clean up really nice. This stuff needs to get cleaned. You can see that there are finger bends in here that need to get cleaned and then pressed. But I think this book is ultimately going to look really nice, and I think we can fold back over some of the paper right there on that corner. And so this book I would have, you know, a high likelihood of getting a 9.6 or a 9.4. And so there you go. We've got some to enjoy and you know, to clean and press and slab, and then we've got a number of other books here that I think are probably best to skip for various reasons, some of which are due to structural integrity and concerns about that, but also, you know, these defects are going to limit it whether it's pressed or not, and so the cost benefit really just says skip this book. Some of these other ones are just simply not going to make the grade that somebody would want for a book of this era and desirability. You know, that desirability kind of fluctuates a little bit, but really those key issues like Amazing Spider-Man 252 I think are always going to be sought after. Some of these other first appearances or crossovers I think kind of ebb and wane, and that really puts the upward pressure on making sure you have really high grades if you're thinking about sending these to CGC. Is a value proposition. If you're looking to do it because it's part of your own collection, no judgments there, slab whatever you want. All right, so that was it here. So hopefully you got some value out of just me going through this pre-screen and looking at some of the defects that I think are cleanable and pressable, as well as some of the ones that are not. So please go ahead and find me on Facebook and Instagram. Give me a like, drop a comment, and please, most of all, subscribe to the channel. It's been a lot of fun watching it grow, and thank you for your attention.